On behalf of Dr. Andrew Bamber and myself, very much appreciate coming to the Minex Eurasia conference and sharing with you our experience. We've worked together for almost 15 years, and I've been involved in Eurasian projects for 20 years. And it's been a great experience. And the projects are, obviously, we're not going to go into too much detail about owners and things like that. We're talking about innovative technology, because 20 years on from when I started, the global energy and environmental situation we're in, as well as now the economic situation, is more critical. And the advanced technologies for the geology, the mining, the sensing and sorting that Andrew will talk about, and the downstream metallurgical processes have become more critical in terms of the energy consumption, especially the carbon footprint, as you all, I'm sure, know. And hydrogen is coming forward. So if we go to the next slide, I'm really talking about stainless steel, because number one, it's infinitely recyclable. And you know what I mean by that, because we use it to eat, etc., etc. And the two most critical metals, because it has iron, of course, are nickel, that is now growing in the battery industry substantially, but in the stainless steel industry, it's doubled in the last 15 years, mostly in the greater Eurasian area in China. And it grew in nickel there, but the nickel has moved to Indonesia now. They're the biggest producer, 1 million tons a year, based on the fact they closed selling it out to China and elsewhere. So there was big investment in Indonesia to produce nickel there. I'm not going to talk too much about that, but the situation about nickel and chromium, which is the other metal in stainless steel, is all about their high energy consumption and what we can do about that. So if we go to the global map here, which I've borrowed from the website, where you can go to and download it, but the companies that, apart from Barra, that I've been privileged to work with for up to 45 years are Mintech in South Africa. You can probably hear from my accent, although I went to school here, in junior school. It's South Africa, and South Africa's had involvement in nickel globally because of the platinum industry and the nickel production as a byproduct from the platinum industry. And Mintech's had involvement in at least 50% of the nickel laterite projects. I'm not going to talk about the sulfides, they're very important, but laterite is growing, and of course it also has cobalt in some of them as well. So Kazakhstan has been an area in which some of the project work was done, going back with Oriole, and that was constructive project work. And so I'm not going to talk much more about it, but you can see all the countries that have produced nickel, and many of them have had Mintech involvement, and I'll just mention what their technology is briefly in the next couple of slides as we go forward. But if you look at the next slide, moving from the global nickel laterite, the chromites have a different profile. South Africa started chromites back in the 1960s. I moved from gold, which is very big in Kazakhstan now, and South Africa was the leading country, now it's one of the minor ones, to chrome. And luckily my father was a mining guy, he said that's where you should go. He was right. And very fortunately, that's how I got involved in Kazakhstan. And some of the companies are here as well that participated in those projects. And so the chrome projects South Africa is now no longer the biggest producer of chrome, it's now China as well. So the greater Eurasian region really dominates stainless steel, the 60 million tons, and let's talk about that briefly as we go through the next few slides. Now, I'm not going to go into thermodynamics because I'm not the specialist, but I had to do it at university. But that graph on the left is like a picture of the real story, that you have to reduce iron to get the nickel, copper and cobalt as shown there up to over 90% if you do it pyrometallurgically, high temperature. And you can only see that the chrome and manganese come up this way. So those graphs go this way and that way. And that picture tells you what the thermodynamic picture on the right in the Ellingham diagram shows. And I'm not going to go into the details, but the shift from carbothermic to hydrogen has only appeared in the last 5 to 10 years, where it shows hydrogen not as H2, but as hydrogen H, one molecule, one atom, and H, which is ionized, as much more reducing agents positive on that graph. And very few people have seen it. I hadn't seen it till 5 years ago, so I apologize. But have a look at that and see if it relates to what you're working on. But I think that was and now a lot of research organizations are working that way, which is very good for the future. And talking about hydro-pyro integration, if you look at nickel ore grades, and of course what Andrew's going to be talking about is methodology to upgrade the ore from the geology and the mining, etc. You're looking at something between 1 and 2.25% in nickel grade. That's low. That means the energy consumption is between 50 and 100 megawatt hours per ton of nickel. That's a huge amount of power. And that graph shows that. I'm not going to go into the details, but if you take a hydrometallurgical leaching process and produce an intermediate which can contain between 35 and 70% nickel, you can see how the production goes up exponentially, and the energy consumption goes from something like a 60 or 80 megawatt furnace down to one that's 12 megawatts. So you can see the difference is 5 times at least lower in energy. So the way forward is synergistic with battery materials. It competes, but it's synergistic, because if you're in that market and you know the nickel market for stainless steel, you can combine the two and you can work within the framework of the variability, and I think that's the way forward. And again, that graph just shows, the largest furnaces are 80 megawatt for nickel. There's even one now in Guatemala at 90. But some of those furnaces have had challenges. And so having higher grade ore is a big advantage to have a smaller sized furnace that is easy to operate, to move from 80 to 60. So that's what that graph or chart shows. Now just moving to chrome for a minute. Chrome alloys produced in Kazakhstan are high grade. South Africa, it's about 50. In Kazakhstan, it's around 70 because of a very high chrome to iron ratio chromite there. And so if you look at how do you reduce the energy consumption in producing ferrochrome alloys, you have to preheat to about 800, or better still pre-reduce, but not many people are doing it yet. The operations came from Japan and are in South Africa these days, but pre-reduction can, as that graph shows, more than double the production or decrease the power from 70 to 25 megawatts. And how you do that with a minimum carbon footprint is very, very important. So just implementation of projects on nickel. The biggest plant other than in Guatemala is the 80 megawatt furnaces, the 2 built in New Caledonia, using the technology that was developed at Mintec, and Oriel was also let's say the developer, co-developer with Mintec of that technology, in looking at 2 electrodes versus 1. The technology is advanced now. We can probably go back to just 1, but that plant has had challenges to get up to 80 megawatts, but it's on the way there. And it also, because it has a fluidized bed, not a rotary kiln, it can use more advanced technologies for pre-reduction, fortunately. Now, I think the most globally successful project now is in Kazakhstan for ferrochrome, which is the technology that I was fortunate enough to be involved with developing in South Africa, and actually chairman of the company that got it up to 30 megawatts and then 65. But that Kazchrome, part of the ERG group, is now operating, and we went to visit it during the International Ferroalloy Conference in 2013. You can see the group there visiting the furnace it was built, and those 4 furnaces now are even more effective than that shows there. And so that demonstrates that the DC furnace technology, direct current, with that type of furnace, and that's the Mintec test furnace, actually has been implemented in Kazakhstan, and they've done a very good job. So I think that's congratulations. That leads the world. So I think the innovative technology is there. That's it. Andrew, you want to